Cool, so hi, welcome to the second ever Booost Conversations. You might have noticed if you watched the first one, we've upgraded slightly. We are now in a professional studio in London as opposed to be on Zoom. Obviously, our first Conversations event last year with Alex Heron was really well received, and certainly by the university community and also students that watched it as well. So we thought, kind of, how can we continue with that? How can we carry on from that? And make it both useful for everybody who wants to watch. So basically people who work with students, parents of sons, daughters who are students currently in further education or secondary school and perhaps going on to university. And we came up with George. So we have George Sullivan with us today. Weird story is that one of the kind of reasons me and George I kind of reached out to George is we actually happened to go to the same school.
Didn't.
Although many years apart. I think you joined as I left, which says something about the age gap that we'll gloss over. We've also got Curtis here today, who you guys might know as heads up our marketing at Booost. So you might see his name on the bottom of the emails. I'm Tom. I'm the business manager at Booost and apparently now podcast host. This is well out of my comfort zone. Certainly wasn't in the job description when I joined. But most of you guys that have seen me at events will know me as the chap who demos Boost and runs it around the country to all four corners of the UK to get to these students. So rather than me give a big glossy introduction about George and pretend I know all of his background and all of the key stats and figures, I'll let him do that. I will just say we are very privileged today that he's managed to fit us in because he has been in Parliament this morning, no doubt. So he's gone straight from the Houses of Commons to Booost Conversations. Booost Conversations, a slightly more relaxed feel, hopefully. So I'm going to hand over to George and let him introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Tom. Curtis, Tom, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is George Sullivan. I'm 25 years old and I predominantly work in mental health and suicide prevention. I currently live at home in Banstead, so in Surrey, with my parents. And a lot of the reason why I got into this industry and working space is largely through my own personal experiences, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about. But yeah, a lot of what I do is I am on the organising committee of Baton of Hope UK. So that's why I was in Parliament earlier today. So we're hopefully lobbying policy and politicians for better processes and procedures for suicide prevention and mental health, both in the workplace and in educational settings as well. I'm also a public speaker, so I use my own personal experiences to speak about the awareness and understanding of mental health and suicide prevention, mainly to secondary school students, because that's kind of where my situations and experiences started. And I'm also the director of operations at Optimal Minds. So Optimal Minds are a psychological strategy consultant. It's a bit of a mouthful. But we've developed programs on emotional intelligence and self-awareness to kind of improve the mental health in the workplace, help it be more safe and supportive for people to talk about their experiences.
So now you can see why I got George to say that, because there's no way I was going to be able to remember all that and reel it off. But like I say, one of the first times I saw George was actually on LinkedIn, and I just got caught on one of his posts, and then kind of did a bit of digging, and it just kind of made sense. It really made sense to the community that we work in at Boost and what our aim is in supporting students in education with a wide range of study-related difficulties, and also that mental health and wellbeing aspect that is so important for us to talk about and have a conversation about. And that is really the ethos around Boost Conversations. We want to take topics and air it and hopefully help to share wisdom of guests and what have you to help those working with and also students themselves. So there's a million and one places where we could start with this, I think. And I've ummed and ahed, I've written Google Docs, I've written flashcards about where we could start. But I think the best place to start would be perhaps maybe at the beginning, student experience, secondary school. You said you go back into secondary schools now. Kind of what's the backstory? Where's kind of George Sullivan come from?
Yeah, so as Tom mentioned, I was at school. So that's a school in Ewell in Surrey, which is an all-boys state school. A lot of amazing things with that school, very good at sport, academically was very good for a state school as well, but obviously at school there are certain situations and environments that teachers probably don't get to see either or experience. And certainly in that kind of environment, there was the elements of toxic masculinity. So you had homophobia, racism, a lot of kind of, people say testosterone, which I've actually learned it's not testosterone, it's cortisol. But there was, it was an environment which if you were showing emotion or kind of feelings, then it was seen as a weakness, essentially. There was also this culture of banter, which essentially was bullying, just glossed over as banter. Some people had things made up about them, which kind of obviously weren't as hard hitting as some of the things that might have potentially been aimed at me, because it was more personal and things that I couldn't easily change about myself. So I suppose that was kind of the trigger of everything happening. I wouldn't say it was the pure only reason for it, but a lot of these things do have triggers. So I just started to feel kind of really lonely, really not worthy, not kind of worthless, like no one cared really, which very quickly spiraled into self-harming and suicidal thoughts. Now for a 15-year-old boy that has never had any kind of education, any kind of awareness or understanding on such a topic, society didn't accept it, the school environment didn't accept it, so I had essentially nowhere to turn to. I was also an only boy in my family, so I had two sisters, mum and dad, so I didn't really know where to go. So the only way that I knew how to deal with that, or knew that I was dealing with it, was to self-harm and was thinking about suicide. It was very lucky that I have to kind of say that I was actually a very outgoing. I'm quite an extroverted person, very personable, sporty as well. So I played a lot of football, and that just switched. I kind of completely became really recluse, not my outgoing normal self anymore. I was walking out of lessons. I wasn't really paying attention, and it was lucky enough that a teacher actually spotted that at school. Saw that something was wrong. I didn't know how to verbalise it to anyone, so they got me to see the school counsellor, which eventually was what allowed me to then get those thoughts out, really start to understand what was going on. Of course, that didn't solve everything, but it gave me an environment and an outlet to be able to just not keep them in my head, which is so important in this space. Is just not letting them keep locked up in your own mind. So that kind of improved. I was injured at sport at the time as well, so that injury subsided, and obviously the physical activity allowed me to kind of improve my mental health as well. So that scenario, I tried to forget about it, if I'm totally honest. No one really knew what was going on. I didn't think anyone would really understand, so I tried to push that kind of experience totally away. What I didn't realise, and kind of working in this environment now, is that a lot of unprocessed trauma, which of course that self-harming and suicidal experiences brought up and kind of generated, I didn't really know what to do with it. So I got into drugs. So I started to abuse drugs and went to university. And it was in my final year at university during lockdown. So this was in October 2020. So of course lectures were all on Zoom, group work was all on Zoom. You technically have to be breaking the law to go and see your friends, which of course in a student environment, especially at university, you're massive social creatures and you want to go and see your friends. But I continued to do the same. I didn't really know what to do with those negative thoughts from being locked up and not knowing what to do. So it amalgamated into a situation where I essentially experienced a drug-induced psychotic episode. That was from a few years of ketamine abuse that essentially led to me dissociating, which basically means you don't feel as though you're in your body. And derealization and depersonalization is kind of thinking you're in a video game, thinking you're in a film, so essentially that life wasn't real. Having those thoughts, we were on the walk home away from my friend's house where we were drinking and partying and stuff, and I tried to run in front of a car on the walk home with my friends. And I hadn't obviously expressed anything that had been going on or what I'd been thinking. So they were very taken aback and didn't really know what to do. But we got into my flat quite safely, and at that point I was quite openly expressing, I think this is the time for me to go. I don't think I should be here anymore. So we went up to the upstairs into my flat, and actually I tried to run into the kitchen and grab a kitchen knife to stab myself, which luckily they wrestled the knife off me, and at this point were in shock, but also in genuine alarm and emergency that they had to get the emergency services. So one of them locked them in my bedroom with me, while the other was outside my room calling the emergency services. It was in that moment where I kind of wish I wasn't as switched on, I suppose, even in that sense, that I essentially made a very quick escape route plan. So I saw a glass of water on my bedside table, which I threw at my friend to distract him. I then ran to my bedroom window, climbed out the window and onto the neighbour's roof, ran over that roof and dived off. I didn't stop to think about what I was doing. I didn't stop to look over the ledge. It was just a straight run and jump. I ended up falling nearly 3 stories, so it was about 25 feet onto what I thought was going to be the concrete below. Little did I know, obviously being knocked unconscious and all sorts, that I actually hit a parked car before I hit the pavement. And that is what the hospital told me when I woke up in that hospital bed, was that's what saved your life. I was in absolute, obviously, shock. I didn't really understand what had happened. I was in complete denial of everything that had occurred. Of course, my parents were at home in Banstead, an hour and a half away. And they got a knock on the door from the police at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, saying your son's just jumped off a roof and is in critical care in hospital. They obviously jumped in the car straight away, came to see me. I have a 6-inch scar down my stomach that I'll probably have for the rest of my life. I punctured a lung. I've still got massive problems with my coccyx and pelvic area now, and I was essentially lucky to still be alive, if I'm honest. A lot of the trauma and pain, though, is what I didn't appreciate happened psychologically. I was given a psychological assessment after everything that had happened, but at that point, and in a society, like I said, that doesn't speak openly about mental health and suicide, I was actually embarrassed and ashamed at what I'd attempted, because there was no outlet, there was no one that I could go and talk to or understand what had actually happened. I never had it explained to me. There was no kind of information, to be honest. So actually, in order to deal with it, the only way that I knew how to, especially from my previous experiences at school, was push it away, ignore it, try to distract yourself. So I went back to university 2 weeks later to finish my degree, which, in a strange way, kind of benefited. Of course, after 3 years of hard work, got me to the point that allowed me to be in a position to achieve a first. But that final year, I just had my head down, distracted myself with my university work, and luckily came out, well, not luckily, but through all the hard work, came out with a first. And then the distraction stopped, and then the distraction's gone. So it was at that point where the PTSD and depression really set in. That was when the suicidal thoughts got incredibly bad, almost ideation and essentially kind of imagining yourself taking your own
after
life.
university.
Yeah. So this was getting into the point where I was then planning my suicide. So this wasn't an impulsive act anymore. This was something that I genuinely believed needed to happen because of how much pain and illness was in my mind, essentially. So about 2 weeks before my 24th birthday, in September 21, I was luckily caught by the emergency services as I was in A&E after a kind of angry episode of when your mental health deteriorates that badly, you just kind of lose all sense of self. It's like you're a shell of your former self, essentially. You're not operating the same as you usually would. So I had this spat of rage and thought I'd broken my knuckles. So I went into A&E and I sat down, and the nurse, the first time that someone had ever kind of sat down in front of me and said, are you really okay? Like, what is actually going on? And I just broke down. I just remember just sitting there like, I actually don't know what to do with myself, because I'm in such a mental chaotic state such a dilemma, not knowing where to go or what to do or what to say, that I thought the only way out would be suicide.
Just that simple question.
That simple question.
That
and it's not just that question alone, it's the repetitiveness of it.
Yeah.
Just asking someone, how are you day to day? It's very generic in our conversation, right? But actually asking it the second time, third time around, I needed to actually think about it. And then I was like, hold on, something really isn't right.
Yeah.
So that was when I was caught by emergency services. I spent about 24 hours in a side room because they didn't have any beds. I was sleeping on a PE mat until they luckily got a bed in a specialist ward about 45 minutes from home. So I was transferred there and spent 10 days in there, which was the safest place that I could have been. Suicide watch, of course. There's a lot of stories that I can tell about being in that hospital, good and bad. But that was the place that I needed to be in order to get rid of everything around me, in order to be able to focus just solely on improving my mental health. So they put me on antidepressants. I started on 100 milligrams of sertraline, which is a form of SSRI, which is kind of the most common form of antidepressant. Work differently for different people, of course. So you have to do what's right for you, especially with mental health. And then I was discharged. Found a private psychotherapist that specialised in this kind of thing, and for about 5-6 months, I spent a lot of that revisiting, understanding really what had gone on in my life, the experiences, the trauma, and be able to understand my emotions, my thoughts more. And that really brought me out of that dark hole. That was really important. The medication allowed me to operate from day to day, but it was that deep therapy that really allowed me to process those emotions and experiences. And then essentially I knew this was something that needed more awareness, more understanding. Certainly people with personal lived experience. Because unfortunately you don't get a lot of people talking about their suicide attempts because there is that shame and stigma, or unfortunately they did complete it and they are no longer here. So I feel like it's almost kind of my duty to use my story to make people feel that little bit less alone, that there is that help out there and that things can and will get better with hope.
Sure. I mean, first of all, thank you for being so kind of open and honest. I think whilst I knew bits of your story, obviously from previous conversations, hearing it like that makes me realise just quite a journey that you've been on. And you're completely right. Only hearing it kind of laid out bare is what's going to help people out there who both work with students and students themselves that might find themselves in similar mindsets or what have you. What struck me was how we started literally in secondary school, and in a matter of 5, 6, 7 minutes, we were leaving university, and kind of how quick that went in that story. But actually, you know, it was almost just like a flow. I mean, kudos to the teacher that actually first pulled you aside in secondary school, because, you know, like that was a kind of a first step of intervention, but obviously wasn't enough at that point for whatever reason in terms of whatever policies or procedures were in place. And I will give a bit of a shout out to the teacher that did pull you aside, because it actually transpires it was one of my friends who I went to school with. He'd gone back to be a teacher there, so I won't name drop him, but you know, proud of that. And that's what needs to be happening in secondary schools. You know, teachers that are aware of behaviour changes, and I've been there. Those of you that know me through Booost know that I taught in education for over 10 years and have been a Senko. It is being aware of that and the subtle changes in behaviour. It's what then happens with that that I think is clearly obvious as to what needs to change, or what needs to be more use the word term signposted, but for that support to then be put into place early, because who knows whatever support you might have got then, how that might have then changed the kind of the course that your life went.
Definitely.
In terms of that conversation, obviously you went from secondary school to university. At any point, was there a conversation or a disclosure to either the school or university that, you know, you had what was a mental health difficulty? Or we're going to talk about language in a bit. It's something that we also really need to talk about. But was there ever a conversation that kind of took place in between that transition from being a student to going to university?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting conversation. I suppose hindsight is a wonderful thing, and looking back on those experiences, I actually kind of, before all of my recent attempts and being in hospital and really starting to process through therapy, I thought secondary school made me the resolute man that I am today. But
Step up a lip.
Yeah. But that very quickly transpired into actually there was a lot wrong. And you have to be critical of your life experiences. You can't just go along thinking that was good. You have to really evaluate what has gone on and things that might be affecting you still now. Arguably that teacher did save my life in secondary school, but a lot that doesn't get spoken about is the leap between secondary school and university.
Yeah.
What people care to realise is that is such a giant leap from going, if you're a sixth form, where you've got teachers organising your timetable, you've got set lessons to go to, you'll get in trouble if you don't go to them. College is a little bit more lenient, but still the same principles. And then you go to university where there's a lack of duty of care from the education organisation's perspective. There is a lack of contact time. So I think throughout my university career, the most amount of contact time I had in a week was about 16 hours. So it's like 2 hours a day, if that. So you're not actually having a lot of one-to-one time. A lot of it's in lectures or seminars where there's maximum kind of 30 people, but still there's that lack of direct engagement with anyone from a health service or that could help. A lot of the provisions that are in place at universities at the moment are, if you need the help, you have to go and seek it. Whereas what you have to realise is that people who are mentally deteriorating are suffering from mental health problems and challenges, is that they might not think that they need that help, or they don't want it, or they think that they don't want it, because at that point you become quite pessimistic. It's like literally part of mental health is having an optimistic outlook on life. That's so important. And when you are deteriorating in your mental health, it becomes more pessimistic. You start being more self-critical. You start kind of self-harming language in terms of like, why am I not doing that? Why am I not productive enough? And that kind of then amalgamates into you not thinking help is there, or help is what you need. So I think universities are signposting places that you can go to, but there's less of the direct engagement asking, are you okay? Do you need help? The duty of care is obviously another massive thing in conversation, because I think it was recently, in the past few years, there was a son or a daughter that took their own life at university, and it's kind of where does the duty of care lie?
Who does it lie with? Yeah.
Who does it lie with? Because you've got a student that is majority of the time far away from home. You've got an organisation, an educational establishment that they're attending, that you should realistically be in the care of. Okay, you're an adult, but you're still in education. Like, it's higher education. It's still funded by government as well.
It's funny that as soon as you hit 18, that's it.
It's just like, go and fend for yourself, kind of. Yeah. And actually, I didn't take much notice of it because I am outgoing, because I am an extroverted person. But could you think of someone that is incredibly introverted, isn't very good at making friends, doesn't really know how to engage with others? How daunting, how kind of overwhelming that is, to go into an environment where you're literally just like, go and do it yourself.
Yeah, well, it's one of the big driving factors about how Boost actually came about. You know, having worked as a head of send in post-16, you know, seeing students transition to college, always when I caught up with students, in the first years, they always like to come back at Christmas and to say how they're getting on, stuff like that. It was always that huge influx of independence. You know, I didn't realise quite how much I was going to be on my own. Like you say, you could be a student, move 5 hours across the country. You can't just nip home back to mum and dad's with your bag of washing every weekend, like I did, by the way.
As much as you'd like to.
But I did do that. But, you know, it's not there. And there is a burden of independence, and students, there's a real sense of, right, okay, I'm here now. I can't call mum all the time. I need to figure it out for myself. Actually, one of the biggest things that's come up this year in September cohort just gone, So we partner with Shout 85258, which is part of Boost, 24 hours, 7 days a week, crisis support within Boost to give students that option. But loneliness and isolation has been by far the biggest thing that speaking to people in the industry and one of the main reasons why people are using that Shout service. And like, of course, we're literally taking people from their comfort zone, putting them somewhere else in the country, and saying, here you go, this is your cohort of your people on your course. These are the people you're living with for the next year. Make friends. Go do your work, like that kind of thing. And how that then ties into the academic nature of things. Like you say, you're going from those of you that have heard me do a Boost webinar will know I say this a lot, going from a really structured, supported environment, 6 hours a day, told where to be, what time, when, what to wear, when to have something done by, how to do it. So all of a sudden, right, okay, here's your deadline 5 weeks away. Here's your 16 contact hours. You need to plan when you're studying outside of those hours when to do it. And actually, if you've not been taught study skills and how to manage independent study and all of that kind of thing, and this is outside of mental health as well, any kind of neurodiversity, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism, if you already have a barrier or a neurodiversity that impacts on your ability to meet a deadline and complete work, and an underlying anxiety of that, it's only going to be exacerbated further, right? So that influx of independence thing, the huge onus that goes on it from literally leaving school in June, July to September in 3 months is huge. And it's certainly something we hear, professionals talk about who work with students and that cohort, that transition to university, that first year undergraduate, often presents with issues. So it kind of begs the question, so what could we be doing? How could we make that transition better?
So I think there should certainly be processes and procedures in place that you obviously have, like at the start of university, you'll have like introduction days and as a course though, and like actually the size of my course, I think there was like 700 students on it. So there's no way that I'm actually going to come across half of them throughout my entire university year. So actually some of the people that I spoke to in that first opening day, I never saw again in my university career. So I suppose there, and especially, don't get me wrong, moving into that environment is by and large a really good thing as well, because it's chucking you in the deep end, but you learn really vital life skills from it. But certainly, I think something needs to be done about the duty of care, especially. Something needs to be considered and put in place that means, like, right, we have to make sure that each and every one of our students does feel as though that they have the resources, that we are here competently enough that if they need the help, we can offer it straight there and then. I was going to say, of course, that actually, funnily enough, the only reason my university found out about my suicide attempt, and that was in a confidential environment, was because I applied for mitigating circumstances.
Wow. So that's the only reason they found out was because you applied for an extension.
Yeah. So the only reason why they knew, obviously at that time I was in massive denial and in shame and embarrassment. However, obviously I was in hospital. I then had to go home and deal with concussion and just, I couldn't barely walk basically. So I needed extensions. So you apply for mitigating circumstances that goes to this confidential committee or board that then assesses the situation and says how much extension you need, basically.
You basically had to do the same as someone who just broke their arm.
So I explained it how it was because I didn't really understand how to process it at the time. And the committee granted me 2 weeks extension, which I find quite funny anyway. Because I didn't want to defer again. I wanted to continue my studies, but in what capacity? Like, how much would that have been affecting me? But my lecturers, so the professors on my courses, only knew little bits. I said, I've been in an incident. I'm at home recovering from being in hospital. They obviously sent their condolences and hope for a speedy recovery, but obviously without me disclosing any kind of information about what had happened, they wouldn't know to a couple of them said access wellbeing services, but obviously no links and stuff was sent. It's just like access this service. The committee, because of the confidentiality of it, weren't allowed to tell anyone at the university what had happened.
Wow.
So all they could do was provide some sort of extension on the work.
So it's a process-driven thing, right?
So this is the interesting thing as well, and this is where duty of care comes in, right? Because actually at school, and this is kind of where I slipped through a bit of the safety net as well, was at school I showed the counsellor my self-harm. And at that point, when there is a sign of threat to life, you have to break confidentiality. Yeah. So same principle at university. If they heard that story, if they saw what I'd applied for and what had happened, they'd have to break confidentiality and therefore say some sort of service needs to get involved here, because that isn't a normal situation that you'd then read. Yeah. That they can't have, as a committee, read that and been like, yeah, we'll give them 2 weeks and then that's that.
And I will. So I've obviously been on the side of the fence and of the professional side of things as a teacher, as a Senko, as a head of Send, and worked in many unfortunate circumstances, not too dissimilar, but and I know that the defence, because I know there's some brilliant people who work in disability services in the United Kingdom, in universities, and there for all the right reasons. It's not an individual thing. It's more about the process and procedures, I guess, and more accountability as an organisation, as opposed to, like, obviously there's individual accountability, but has that right training been given? And is that right process in place for that employee to follow? That's
kind of the whole point with when I say mental health is on the radar, but it's not fully understood yet. Because if it was fully understood, these processes would be in place.
And I think
these procedures would be in place.
It's so important that people like you, and then therefore doing what you're doing and speaking how you're speaking, because then it has to, like, that's how people learn. Hopefully, people watching this have learned something new about mental health or what have you, that they thought they might have known before but hadn't quite heard it in those raw terms and that reality, and then put a slightly different spin on it and understand it better, and maybe think, right, okay, what are our processes, and so on. It's funny, but I wanted to touch on one thing that I always struggle with in today's world in general, if I'm quite honest, and this is certainly where my age thing comes into things, is language, right? We were in a conversation when we first met, and I think I was using the term mental health, and you kind of backed me back and said, well, there's a big difference between mental health and mental illness, and that's something that can be often misinterpreted. Yeah. Do you want to just talk a bit about that, and perhaps that language and the use of it, and how that can work?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my secondary school talks, I go into the definitions of mental health and mental illness, which I think is incredibly important, because actually the definition of mental health is our psychological, social and emotional well-being. I interpret that as our emotional and psychological well-being allow us to then operate in society. Of course, if one of those lacks, then all the others kind of fall the wayside as well. You kind of aren't are less productive, you have less concentration, less attention, and this is all to do with mental health. Anxiety and stress are part of mental health. The disorders that can then follow are part of mental illness and disorders. So a lot of mental illness is our diagnosed conditions that affect our thoughts, behaviours, our feelings, our emotions. So although our mental health can fluctuate, and it's important that it does, because if you were plateaued, then something might be happening. But yeah, we have good days, we have bad days, and that's really important to highlight, that just because you've gone through mental health challenges, it does not mean that you have experienced the extent of mental illness. So a lot of what I talk about when I talk about my PTSD and my trauma and those experiences, those flashbacks, those reliving the moments, reliving the feelings of the pain, is not the same as you kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't know what kind of event, but like just saying like, oh, I've been through a similar thing. Sure. Like language is like, that doesn't compare. Yeah. It's kind of similar to saying like, you'll get over it.
Oh, it's a disaster. You know, like something. I lost my car keys. It's a disaster. Well, no, disaster's an earthquake in Turkey. So you have to be really, really aware of what you're actually saying to someone that has experienced mental illness and trauma, because what you think might be a good thing to say might actually end up detrimenting them. Yeah. So, for example, kind of the word commit suicide.
So the history behind the word commit is that everyone says it's commit crimes, you commit murder, and suicide, believe it or not, was a crime prior to 1960.
So that comes from when it used to be illegal.
So, yeah, it was illegal to take your own life. It's still illegal to assist someone in their suicide as well, but it was illegal to take your own life, and that's, I think, where the term stems from, the term commit. So actually, on such a compassionate subject and such a hard-hitting and very complex subject, by the way, suicide isn't just to do with mental health.
Yeah.
It can be an impulsive act, like my experiences. There was an impulsive psychotic episode, but it could be loss of finances. It could be bereaving a loved one. You might have a failed relationship. You might have just lost your job, and suicide becomes an option. Yeah. That is an impulsive act, whereas the deteriorating mental health, which is what I later realised was my mental illness and depression, I think equivalates to about 70% of all suicides are due to diagnosed or undiagnosed depression.
I mean, like, just there's 3 blokes in the room here. Like, what's the stat at the moment with men under 40? It's like the biggest killer.
Biggest killer of men and women under 35.
It's scary, isn't it?
One big thing that's come out from your story and this conversation as a whole is that a lot of the support you received seemed to be reactive. So
exactly.
It was all waiting for something major to happen, and then this became available. Whereas that's not getting to the crux of the issue. That's how mental health develops into mental illness, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, you've mentioned in one instance it was as simple as someone saying, "Are you okay?" that can help with these things and help someone open up. So I was wondering if you have any more advice on things you could do to be proactive, whether it's in your workplace, in a school, in a university, or just with your mates, of what you can do to try and help someone.
And I think the key element there is the asking. Like, don't get me wrong, it doesn't solve every problem asking if someone's okay, but just having that conversation, having the awareness to say, are you feeling suicidal? Are you having thoughts of suicide? That alone isn't going to instantly trigger them and cause them to go into chaos. It's actually showing them that you are compassionate enough to have that conversation. And this is why we're saying we all just need to talk a bit more, but like, we do talk a lot, but just about the wrong things, or just like washing over subjects. It hardly, like, what makes us human is our thoughts and our emotions. And for some reason, through our society and just through generations, it's just washed out that talking about emotion has come far and far less important, and it's become kind of an environment where, I suppose it's capitalism in the sense that we're all trying to make our way through this life. We're all trying to get a good job and provide for our families. But ultimately, if you aren't okay mentally or emotionally, that can really hinder everything.
I wonder how much of first, I think it was Ronan Kemp who did the ask twice, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, fine." "No, are you really okay?"
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, if I asked the question, so say I thought a mate was struggling and I asked that question, do I want to ask that question? Because actually I wouldn't know what to do with the answer if he said, "No, I'm not."
And I think
like, as a person, I'm wondering if you could advise that on this. If I saw a mate struggling, I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, fine." I said, "No, really, are you okay?" He went, "Actually, no, I'm suicidal." I would hedge a bet that a lot of people would then kind of not know how to react to that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about, okay, we know not to try and give advice or pretend we know what they're feeling like. Is there something that an easy message that we can say to those people, how we might then respond to that?
So I think it's about resources, to be totally honest. Like, because this conversation hasn't been normalised or is even in the psyche of a lot of our society, that posing that question or receiving an answer that is, I'm feeling suicidal, could take you back a bit. But I think this was, and he won't mind me saying this, but one of the hardest things for my dad to deal with was the fact that he couldn't solve it.
Yeah.
Like, and unfortunately, we're not professionally trained to. This is a medical diagnosis. This is a medical condition. You wouldn't ask your friend to try and fix their broken arm. So like, you can't say like, can you stop me from being suicidal? So it's very much knowing where to signpost them. Obviously, you've got massive charities, Samaritans, Papyrus for youth suicide prevention. Mind. There are so many mental health charities out there that have resources, have helplines. Unfortunately, you were saying, Curtis, that obviously it's been very reactive rather than proactive, and scarily enough, CAMHS is now saying that they won't take your child unless they have attempted to take their own life. They don't have the capacity to deal with the child if they haven't attempted suicide. So they're essentially waiting for them to do that before they can give them any kind of treatment. And that treatment is short-lived because of how long the waiting list is anyway. That's how scary the situation is in our society right now.
Definition of reactive over proactive.
Yeah, yeah.
And the real issue is the preventative measures. Prevention is economically and emotionally, psychologically so much better than reactivity, because actually if my experiences were prevented by the age of 14, 15, I wouldn't have been out of work for 2 years. I mean, I wouldn't be working in this space, which is obviously so essential that I am now. I think I am now, but the reactivity is where we've got to shift from. It can't be reactive anymore. It has to be proactive. It has to be putting in these process procedures.
There must be also an economic benefit to that, like
massively.
You know, I hate to bring the topic of sales and economics into a topic as important than what we're talking about, but companies that are only supplying reactive support to employees, students, whatever it might be, think about the cost impact of that. I think, actually, could I have prevented this with just having services, proactive things out there, employee wellbeing support, student support in place already that, you know, enabled them to either identify this sooner or that sent them to the right place and what have you. I'm going to ask you two really rapid, quick-fire questions. When just check before I do so, before you went to university, you had a diagnosis?
No.
You didn't? Okay. So that's interesting. Because what I was going to say is, at that point when you went to university, did you consider yourself disabled? If someone had said to you, George, are you disabled?
So it's interesting because, well, I technically have a disability now because I am clinically depressed.
Rapid fire.
Yeah.
What was one word answer?
Yeah. So
okay, but at that point,
at that point, I wasn't, because I was obviously had forgotten about a lot of the childhood experiences or tried to push them away.
And the only reason I ask, and a lot of people might have kind of noticed as a leading question, is because obviously there is a disabled students allowance for students that go to university that does cover mental health. But I think the stat I last saw that came out was only 30% of students eligible for it actually take it up. And in this support is specialist mentors, mental health support, dyslexia, ADHD support, assistive technology, really 3 arms of support that can be really, really useful and help to bridge that gap in transition. I think that what I was getting at was actually what we don't have is enough students leaving sixth form, college, what have you, that have maybe a diagnosis of depression, diagnosis of anxiety, but don't realise that is, classifies them as disabled, and therefore if they saw, do you want to apply for the disabled students allowances, click up on the screen, it's not something they're likely to click yes to, because that notion still exists in a large element of disabled equals wheelchair or something like that. So one thing we want to do at Boost, obviously it's an area we work a lot in, is raise that awareness, raise the profile of the DSA, as it's called, the Disabled Students Allowances, and all the wonderful support you can get through it. But I think a lot of that has to be about this conversation in schools, colleges, making people aware that they're actually eligible for it. So, like I say, I certainly know if I went back, I was diagnosed with ADHD at an early age, and someone asked me when I went to university, do you want to apply for the Disabled Students Allowance? There's no chance is that for me. So that's why I kind of asked the question, and whether there's something that needs to be done there, either in raising awareness or helping people to understand actually a mental health diagnosis does kind of qualify you under as a disability.
Yeah, I think the same rings true, and it is so true that not all disability is visual.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important, because that's a stereotype. When you say disability and you think of someone in a wheelchair, that is a stereotype that has been generalized in society. Not to say that it's true, but that's the stereotype. So actually what you then have to look at is breaking those stereotypes, really understanding that, okay, I am disabled, but what does that mean I'm able of doing? If you have ADHD, you might have far less concentration, but that also means you're far more motivated in doing certain things. You might be really creative. There are, and I think this comes back to mental health in the way that, look at it optimistically. Like, you might have a disability, but what does that also offer you? Neurodivergence allows you to think in different ways that gives you an upper hand to a regular person, if I'm totally honest. You have to appreciate those differences and actually kind of celebrate them in a way.
I think we've seen a big growth in that area over the last, certainly 18 months to 2 years. You know, we've got huge companies like EY opening a neurodiversity centre of excellence. It's now common knowledge that GCHQ actively recruit people with dyslexia and autism because of the specific skills traits that come with those and what they offer, the creative out-of-the-box thinking. So I do think that whole neurodiversity, neurodivergence boom and awareness has really helped from that instance. And there's loads of companies out there doing great things now for that, and the support is there, the tech is there, it's all there. It's just about kind of widening it and making it accessible. Definitely. I'm conscious of time, and one thing I really wanted to give you was a chance to talk about Baton of Hope, because I know this is something you're really invested in at the moment. It's something I've seen loads on LinkedIn. I'm really, really keen to follow. I think it's got the opportunity. It could be really great. Do you want to just talk about that and let people know what Baton of Hope is?
Yeah, definitely. So Baton of Hope UK is a charity that was set up by Mike McCarthy and Steve Phillip, who unfortunately both lost a son to suicide. They were both around in their 30s. So that was set up by those two. Mike has a background in kind of journalism and has been in touch with Three Dads Walking and things like that. So it's a suicide prevention charity. But what our major aim is, what we've realised at the moment is a lot in suicide prevention, that there are amazing charities doing incredible work, but they're all working in silo, that they're all working in local area, don't really have a large outreach, and therefore their services and resources aren't being used to the maximum. So essentially what we're trying to achieve, as well as other stuff, which I'll get onto, is create an umbrella, create a signposting network that allows you to find. So we've got some organisations. So we've got the Lucy Rayner Foundation. Jenny's on our organising committee as well, who lost her daughter Lucy. Yeah. They've got 50 counsellors that aren't being booked up, and those counsellors are on Zoom. So anyone in the country could access that. It's doing things like that are bringing resources together. This is very much an industry, a space. I don't like calling it an industry because it doesn't sound right. But it's a space where we have to bring together all the available resources
and accessibility
to just prevent this as much as we can. It's changing the conversation. So a lot of what I'm working on is the political engagement. So yeah, again, it's policy changes. It's creating roundtables that we can then collate a lot of the information and resources from specialists, from lived experience, to really provide processes and procedures, like in the workplace, like in education, that is preventative, not reactive. That's the real importance. But it's all amalgamating into, so we've got this giant tour starting on the 25th of June. So we're having this baton made by Thomas Light, who I'll get told off if it's not right, but they previously had the royal warrant to the Queen as a jeweler's goldsmith. Oh, you will get told off. That's not right then, won't you? Yeah. So I think their application's in process, or it's been accepted. They're making it for us. It's a beautiful thing. The
Booost Education accepts no responsibility.
It's a beautiful design. It has different elements of the baton, have so many different meanings. The final part at the top of which is the semicolon, which I have tattooed on my arm. So the semicolon is a symbol of suicide awareness and prevention. The meaning is essentially, in English, that a semicolon is used when the author could have ended the sentence but chose not to, which I think is quite a beautiful way of looking at it. But that baton, is going to 12 major UK cities, so starting in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Belfast, Cardiff, Bristol, finishing in London on the 6th or 7th of July. I should know that. And hopefully it will go to Parliament and act as a symbol of we need change. Yeah. The suicide statistics have been, I mean, they're always kind of approximated, because actually what a lot of people don't know is that it goes to a coroner's office, and sometimes they don't actually deem it as suicide, they deem it as died of depression, which then skews the statistics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of interesting, so the entire point is, and I actually found a piece of information yesterday. Obviously I do a lot of research. It's so important to be educated as much as you can on these topics, especially working in it. And it was approximately 140,000 people are hospitalised by attempting suicide every year. 140,000 people. And we've got, on the Office of National Statistics in 2022, I think it was 5,864 people died of suicide.
That doesn't correlate, does it?
It doesn't, yeah.
And is there somewhere some people can go to?
Yeah, so we've got a website,
website,
we've got Instagram, we're on all socials. Our large social media campaign is about to be released. We're building up national sponsors, of course, regional sponsors, yet to announce those, which is quite exciting, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say either. But they're very exciting, and we're going through the process. You have to be accepted as a charity by the Charity Commission. We're literally just awaiting that. We've gone through kind of all the submitting processes and things like that. So
you can just put Baton of Hope into Google and people.
Baton of Hope, it will be there. Yeah, we've got the MP supporters on the website. Yeah, so the whole name came from actually suicide is when someone has lost hope. So I think it's a really beautiful word of hope to say that we can hope to change this.
Great
it's
it picks up on what you said earlier about an optimism around mental health as well.
Exactly.
Just finally, I thought, how can I wrap up my debut podcast?
It's got to be a special way.
No, it's not. It's nothing that's
special. Social media.
I thought about doing that. You know, the Steve. I hope nobody's listening, but if you are, is there a question you wish I'd asked you that I haven't?
Crikey, that's put me on the spot.
Or something you would like to fire back at myself or Curtis as, I guess, a company in the space too.
I think the importance. This is what I say a lot, and I don't know how often it actually gets through to people, but it's the stigma around therapy, is that by and large, and the stereotype is that you go to therapy because there's something wrong. But actually, there is absolutely nothing wrong with understanding yourself better, being able to understand your thoughts, your emotions, and really understand the life experiences that you've been through. I promise you there will be a lot of people that have gone through life who have gone through some really difficult times, and then just had that influence on themselves that thought, this is how I'm made up, this is how I'm meant to be. And actually, it's not that way. So I think providing more accessibility, providing that therapy you don't have to be struggling to go to it. It's actually incredibly healthy and will put you in an even better position for the rest of your life. Essentially, it's done wonders for me. And
I think we could have done a part 2 on this. Actually, I feel like we could go on and on, and certainly those who I speak to know I'm huge about reflection, and maybe we're seeing lots more diagnosis now in adults, and maybe because reflections now become quite a big part, and actually just awareness of life and kind of what's come about. You know, we speak about looking back at our school and our upbringing and the experience we had, and maybe actually people are now reflecting on their life to date, and it actually putting some pieces together, you know, like a jigsaw, and things now starting to make sense, and then that leading them to perhaps exploring a diagnosis or whatever it might be. So I'm fully aware that we're in this lovely London studio, but they have, you know, we do have to pay by the hour. Unfortunately, we are in danger of getting a big cut sign lockdown. The lights just might fall over because they're fed up with us. But George, all I can say on behalf of Boost Education, firstly, is thank you. Hopefully, thank you on behalf of everyone who's who's watched this and logged on to listen as well. I think there's so much I've taken away just from the 2-3 times that we've spoken and met previously. Keep doing what you're doing. Like you spoke about lived experience being the voice. There are things you can say that others just can't. So keep doing it. It's incredibly important and powerful. And thank you, just massive thank you, really, for being so honest.
Thank you.
Thank you very much as well for the opportunity. It's been wonderful. Amazing hosts.
Good stuff. And just to recap, so you take Baton of Hope into Google, and to find more about Booost Education and the products that we offer to university schools and students, go to www.boosteducation.com.